Hey, good evening. This is Tiger. Welcome to my stream. Hey, AJ, thank you for sending the first chat message of the evening out into the world. Have a good evening as well, and thanks for your good evening. Welcome to my stream. We will be doing steam locomotives today again, and have a special look at how the cylinder works in steam locomotives. Here the disclaimer before we start and while the game is loading up. Obviously we are doing stuff that is only related with playing a computer game, so please leave the real trains and railway installations alone and to the professionals. It is difficult enough to deal with all the trouble connected with running a railway, even if you do not have to deal with people interfering. So, we will be going to West Cornwall again. Rivet. We played a lot of Rivet content in the past days. And so we will go on West Cornwall Local is a DLC that people think or have controversial opinions about it, and we are playing. I like it really a lot. It is a fun DLC to drive in, and we will be doing a scenario that comes with the West Cornwall steam Railtour. Hey Theodoros, nice to have you on the stream. It's great that you managed to catch the stream live, and I hope you will not regret investing the time at such a late hour at the place where you're living. Old troubles with modern solutions is the scenario. What is a nice scenario because it does not pressure you with a timetable. You can take all the time in the world. We have to take a steam Railtour train, so in more or less modern train and not modern days, a steam train with Railtour people on board. Not too many, we will see that, but some of them are actually in. And we are, since it is January, we are playing in winter. It is snowing. Dispatcher, one of the class 150s has broken down and caused the route ahead to be blocked. You will have access to use the opposite track. So this is our train. Obviously we got off our locomotive, and we are supposed to continue on this track here on the left side, obviously, but we can't because you can see it over there in the fog. There is the broken down 150, and we cannot move it out of the way, so we need to move around it. Why does this sound familiar? That the train has broken down. Did we have an equal scenario before? I have never played it before. I actually played it this week for the first time. So maybe something that is not so unlike this one. They often have broken down trains in their scenarios to justify going on the opposite track. What I really like are those Jubilee class variants that Rivet introduced here to the game, with the shiny finish that looks, in my opinion, much more like the real deal of a steam locomotive. Here with this glossy finish on the boiler. It comes with a greenish one and the red one, and those locomotives look really great. It's the Jubilee class, the 6P, as you can see here, that we know from Spirit of Steam as well. So here's our broken down 150 again, and what we need to do is actually to reverse our train, and reversing and setting back a full train is always a dangerous and difficult thing, and you almost in all situations need a very special permit given by the dispatcher, and usually you must have someone at the rear end of the train if you're actually reversing it. It does look fancy. I've seen in other sim BR52 is incoming, at least in the roadmap. Is it a BR52? A German one? That would be actually interesting to see. So we have to open our window, otherwise we can't see because there are no wipers. What we have now on those locomotives, we have an AWS system fitted that can be turned on here. Here is the button to acknowledge. And AJ, we have a speed clock now on our locomotive. What is a extreme quality of life improvement. So we have to set back our train. That means we have to reverse the reverse to a backward setting. And we have to release the brakes. Brakes are full on, as we can see here. Vacuum is at 0. We needed to put it to 21.5 to fully release the brakes. And then it is always with steam engines and the snow, it is a difficult story. Here we are starting downhill, so that is not so the problem, but when starting uphill, and we will get to a point when we start uphill later, this is actually quite challenging in my opinion. So what we do, open the reverser very slowly or cautiously, release the brakes. You can see the brakes are releasing. If you want to speed up the process, large ejector open, then this actually gets sped up. But never forget to close it again, otherwise we will lose a lot of steam and the brakes probably not. So, and we are already running backwards. This is Hank, as we know him. When starting the train, I like to do this, closing the regulator, opening just for one chuff, closing it again. This is sometimes actually giving you better results than just opening it and having it open. See, the shunting signal is open, giving us access to the switch. And so we're going on the opposing direction track. Chuff chuff. Close the cocks maybe. They are open by default. So reversing the train is always a maneuver that needs to be secured by a lot of people, signals, whoever is involved in what you have, because obviously this is a dangerous thing to do. And we're supposed to stop at the signal T37. We cannot see it here at the back end. I think I need to go about at 100 yards are left because, or something like this. Yes. And where is the signal that we are supposed to stop? It is on the other end, obviously. It's this signal that they are naming. Okay, we are already too far away to get it with the 3 camera. And here, this is the signal that we were supposed to stop at. Interestingly, those signals have a green light, but you cannot see it sometimes, especially when you're close up. Then it looks like a white light that is not on. You deleted something, HA, and banned. Someone was trying to sell us their Super valuable services. Thank you for keeping it clean. Well, reverser. They typically tell you put it to 75 when you're starting the train. This is sometimes really difficult when you want to start the train in slippery conditions. We're going downhill from here, so it is actually not so problematic again. Release our brakes. Slightly open on. And you heard it, we are already getting wheel slips. But we are moving. It is so easy to get wheel slips when you're trying to start your train. Ah, we are actually running uphill. The downhill indication was still for... Turn on the sander, but usually not before the train is actually moving a bit. Otherwise you will pile a big amount of sand in front of your wheels. And here also the same thing as to get the train into motion in the slippery conditions. It is always nice to open the regulator for one chuff and close it again and nudge it that way. So we have 18 miles to go. 30 is allowed here, but don't forget that we are supposed to go back on our left track as soon as we have passed the broken down. This is actually a view that does not help you a lot in snowy conditions, because you don't see jack. So I might want to have my first number 3 camera at the front, so that we have some... Because obviously it is always the same thing with steam engines, you do not really see a lot, because the boiler is in the way. And we will have to be down to 15 when we're on the switch. This is why I'm not accelerating more. Can already get back the cutoff a bit, I think. No, maybe not. Maybe leave it. Not to throw too much sand here. Yes, I can sand with this locomotive. Now we are passing the broken down 150, and now we're going across the switch back to the track that we are supposed to go. Here's a split banner indicator. We are not going straight ahead to the coast, but we are going to the right. And as soon as the train is across the switch, we can accelerate properly. Yes, it's actually this nice thing here, the sander. And when I'm trying to accelerate, I throw some sand. So that we're not a nice view, so that we're not getting wheel slips. When you're getting wheel slips, you can actually see the sparks flying from the wheels. Now we're going downhill, that means I can get the reverser down as well. Maybe 32, 28, something like this. End of sanding. Now we should be fast enough so that we don't need to sand. When we are supposed to slow down and use the brakes, then we will probably use the sand again. You can see the sanding equipment here. Can you see those little tubes? This is where the sand comes out and is thrown in front of the wheels. There's one for front and for going backwards. Going uphill, we need a bit more cutoff again. So this route is actually really nice for using the steam locomotives, I think, because you have a lot of inclines, declines, and a nice speed profile for it. So that gives you a lot of opportunity to play around with your reverse and to see where you can get the train running faster. The faster that you go, the lower the cutoff, and on the other hand, the more intense the gradient, the more cutoff you need. And to balance this is always an interesting thing on a steam locomotive. We started at Truro. That means the next speed limit will be for Redruth. Normally all the reductions in speed limit are announced by moped boards on this route. This is the AWS sound for a green signal. Actually get a bell, not a horn. And yeah, at the moment we just have to run uphill, trying to get as much speed as we can. So the point of this Railtour is to see what, for the people that are on the train, well, they are getting to see the great Cornish landscape in the snow and the steam engines sweating and huffing and puffing in the snow. I'm confused because everything is plain white covered in snow. Well, usually it is plain green covered in green foliage. But I think in real life Cornwall is a beautiful country. in snow as well as without the snow. I actually would love running there on a train, on a steam train in the snow. So, downhill. It's actually going to 70 before we get to Redruth. Winter Wonderland is a thing, I guess, he says. Yes. I am totally a guy for Winter Wonderland. Closing the regulator since we are running downhill and we are at top speed. More or less. Maybe we get to the 70 before we have to use the brakes a bit, but no, I don't think so. Next incline. Take the momentum, here's the 70. Aha, we are actually getting wheel slips here. When we're getting wheel slips, we'll have to slow down, take the steam away. Now I'm having wheel slips even without. Now something weird happened, didn't it? This thing is running like crazy. Let's see if we can get it with some brakes. This is running fast now, actually. The valve gear, even without any steam coming out. Yeah, I have a slight inkling that this is a bug. Try to catch the wheels with applying the steam brake. Only on the locomotive. No, it doesn't catch it. So we're slowing down even more. But the valve gear is running crazy. Let's see how we can salvage this. Choo choo, CD Radar, you... Maybe it normalizes after a stop. Yeah, you just managed to get here to witness a somewhat strange behavior of this train. No steam, no momentum, but the wheels are turning like crazy. Look at that. We're standing still. The locomotive's off. What is it doing, my locomotive? What did you do to the locomotive, Hank? I can do whatever I want. It is stuck in this state here. That is one strong shaft, yeah. Now I think I caught it. Now I caught it. Okay. With putting the reverser to the maximum cutoff, that caught it. But now we have to get this train rolling again while standing in an incline of 1.3. Let's see if we can do this. Let's see if we can do this. 55 should be enough. Releasing. So what I want to do, I want to release the brakes, but keep the steam brake on. Then the train will dangle from the locomotive, but with a bit of luck we will have enough brake force on the locomotive to slowly let us start here without wheel slips. Careful on the regulator. There was again the wheels already. Even more careful on the regulator. Letting go of the steam brake. Maybe a little, not that much reverser. Yes, we are rolling again. You would not believe it. At times like this, I really like to make fun of those who swear at modern machines and computers because I don't want to be rude. But this wouldn't happen to a modern train. No, I think it would not happen to a steam locomotive in real life either. But you can do it. It's actually cute. If you are really careful on the regulator, use some sand. Find the proper cutoff on the reverser, and then let go of the steam brake. Then we can get this train rolling uphill, even in adverse conditions like this. So I give it a bit more torque on the reverser, since we are still running uphill and are very slow. But with more steam we can lower it. The more torque, the more requirement for adhesion between the rail and the wheel. So this is obviously a physics problem in the game. Because in real life those rods and wheels and nuts and bolts would rather break than allow that. So we are approaching Redruth. There is a 40 limit coming up here. You can see it as soon as we are across the hill. Sand off. No sparks, this is good. Here's the 40 Morpeth board. That means we can be a bit more easy on the regulator. Also the reverser can be taken back. Since we're grading at this point, we need actually some brakes. Still a bit until we get to the 40 board. Level ground now. So a bit of steam and cutoff to not lose too much speed. And now we're going in the downhill part again. Here's the 40 board. Here's Redruth station. And here is the thunderstorm and the lightning. After this viaduct, I think we can go back to 60 or 65. $60 it is. Release the brakes and I think accelerating. Downhill, we don't need more than 26 cutoff or something. And if I remember correctly, we will have an increase in the speed limit before we get another decrease again. But this might be imagination. No, yes, it is 70 and then 60. And then even 50 for this abandoned station on the way. Full steam ahead. going uphill again, so we need a bit more cutoff, I think. Slightly more, 32. And since now everything is rolling as it is supposed to, I think it is time for the presentation. Before we get the train home, actually. So, what is the presentation about today? Where is the presentation today? Is it here? Yeah. Here it is. But it is not in the correct setting. Here we are. Well, just a short recap. We have been talking about how does a locomotive work, obviously. We have coal and water in our tender. We have a firebox where we put the coal in and we burn it. We need air that usually gets blown in or sucked in from below. And the exhaust fumes are sent out through the chimney via the smoke box, and we use the heat to boil water that we get from the tender via the injectors into the boiler, and in the boiler we create steam, and the steam we pick up in the steam dome. We have here the valve that allows the steam to go into the tubes that lead to the steam chest, and this is, well, controlled. This is why this is a green tag by the regulator or the throttle. So this is one thing that we can control. This is the big lever that we have in our cab, and what we always need to be so super careful about, that we do not allow too much steam and throw not too much steam in the steam box. And on the other hand, we always have to have enough, what is not a problem with the automatic firing, because Hank is such a great fireman that we almost never run out of steam. The steam is going here through the tubes. There is usually then a superheater on the more modern steam locomotives. We will talk about the superheater, I think, in a different video. And so the steam is heated even more when it goes to the steam chest, and we have a hot pressurized steam arriving in the steam chest. And from the steam chest it can be sent to the cylinder, and in the cylinder we have the piston that is traveling to the left and to the right, and we have two ports where the steam can go either on one end of the piston head or on the other end of the piston head, and push it to the left or to the right, to the back or to the front. And we control this by a valve that can be a slide valve, but on the more modern locomotive it is typically a piston valve, like this one is a piston, called a piston valve because it's like a piston, two heads on both sides, and it is connected with a spindle in the middle, and we can use this to control the flow of the steam through the steam chest into the cylinder. And this is what we will take a closer look at today. Obviously we also need a way for the steam to get out again. This is where we have the exhaust piping that gets us to the smoke box. What is important, because the exhaust steam does not only need to get out of our locomotive, but we need the draft that is created by the exhaust steam to create the draft for the fire, so that those exhaust gases from the fire are actually sucked out of the firebox via those tubes and then go out of the chimney. We have already heard that if for some reason we do not have any exhaust steam because we have cut off the steam that is provided to the steam chest and the cylinder, then we have a blower that creates this this draft in a different way, so that we can actually get our exhaust gases through the smoke box out through the chimney, and otherwise we would have them in the cab, and this is obviously very inconvenient to have the exhaust gases in the cab. The movement of the piston back and forth needs to be translated into a radial movement in the turning of the wheel. This is why we have the main rod that we just have seen going crazy in this bug on our locomotive, that translate the lateral movement back and forth of the piston into a radial movement of the wheel by connecting it with a pin or a nut that is not in the middle of the wheel but in an eccentric position, so that when pushing it back and forth, the wheel turns. This is the idea of the whole thing, and then we transfer this movement to the other wheels. So the main driving wheel transfers it to the other driving wheels by a connecting rod. And then the next thing, what is always a complicated thing, is the valve gear. What we have talked about, we need somehow to control this piston valve and the movement of this piston valve. And for that, we have valve gears like the Walshearts gear or the Stevenson gear or other gears. We will talk about this in different streams, I think, where we somehow connect the spindle or the shaft of the piston valve with the movement of the wheels, or even on the crosshead. This is the specific of the Walshearts gear, that it is connected also on at the crosshead, and by proper linking that we will talk about in a different stream, why it is like this, we have the possibility or the opportunity to feed back the movement of the piston to the piston valve, so that it regulates the feed of the steam into the cylinder. And with the reverser, we can actually control it and modify the way that the steam is fed back into the cylinder by lifting and lowering this part of the gear, so that all the ratios in the levers are changed, and then the behavior of the piston valve is changed as well, so that we can control the flow of the steam. We will talk about the valve gear thingies in a different stream. Today we will talk about the flow of the steam in the cylinder through the steam chest by means of the piston valve, and later we will have a closer look at why we want to control it and how we can actually control it. What we also have talked about is that we sometimes need to get water out of the cylinder that tends to accumulate there if the cylinders are getting cold and the water is more or less condensing out of the steam. And for that we have the cylinder cocks, where we can get the water out of the cylinder that we don't need there. This is recap. This is what we have talked about in a broader fashion in the first steam locomotive video on the Spirit of Steam DLC. What I wanted to concentrate or focus today is this part, the steam box and the cylinder, and how we control or want to control the flow of the steam in the cylinder, so that it can be used for a proper movement of the piston back and forth. And in videos that are to come, we will have to look at how we can control this by means of the valve gear. So let's enlarge this a bit and let's see what is happening here. This again is our piston. Now I've got the blue color out of it. This piston is now in a position that is rather far to the left. It wants to go to the right most probably, and this is our piston valve that is also quite far to the left. This is where the steam comes in. This is connected through all the tubes to the regulator and then the boiler dome. So this is where the live steam, the hot steam that we need for driving the locomotive and a lot of other things, comes in here. And you can see that the way of the steam to go into the cylinder is past this thin part of the piston valve, around it, and then through the port behind or in front of, just depends on which way you look at it, of the piston head. Whereas our exhaust steam needs to go out, and for that we have this exhaust tubes. So this is where the exhaust goes to the used steam that is still rather hot and quite compressed, but not as hot and compressed and powerful as the live steam. So if you look, for example, at the injectors that you have on the locomotives provided in this DLC, there is one for live injector and exhaust injector. That means if you're using live steam or exhaust steam to operate the injectors. So here is this, why you have those two words as opposites. So the cylinder works more or less in 4 phases, and those phases are the following. The first phase, actually it is a cycle movement, so all the 4 phases are continuously repeated. So we have to start somewhere. Let's call the admission phase the first. Admission is we admit steam into the cylinder, into the room in front of the piston, so that we can push the piston away to the other side. So in the admission phase, we connect the room where we want to have the pressure applying to the piston head with the live steam by moving the piston valve to the left, so that the steam can pass through the narrow part of the valve and the port into the room behind or in front of the piston, at least in the room where we want to have pressure against this piston head. And then this piston is forced to the other side in this way. That is the admission phase, where we have live steam going in. The next thing, at some point, there will be a point where this valve goes to the right, just as the piston goes to the right, and then this port is closed. Live steam, that is still in this chamber here, cannot go to the cylinder anymore. But the steam is locked in here at this part. This is the cut-off or expansion phase. Cut-off because the steam is cut off at this point, so we are not getting any more new fresh steam into the cylinder, but we still have steam here, and this steam is not only hot, and it is also compressed, so there is still a lot of force in that steam. And even if we are not feeding any more new steam into the chamber, into the cylinder, the steam tends to expand because it is pressurized, it is hot, and this leads to the steam wanting to take more room. So there is pressure in the steam, and the steam even locked in here, so that we do not have any more static pressure coming from the locomotive. This steam still applies a lot of pressure to the piston, so that even if we have a cut off here, we have still force against the piston head. That is getting less and less because the steam is expanding, losing its power, its intensity, and the ability to move the piston, but it is still pushing the piston into this direction. This is why it is the cutoff or expansion phase, because the steam is expanding here. The next phase would be when the piston valve has moved furthermore to the right and is now opening the port on the again, but now connecting this port to the exhaust. So our steam has lost quite a lot of its power by pushing the piston to the right, and it can go out now. This is happening when the piston has already moved to its extreme right, or actually most of the time it happens before it reaches the extreme right, but it is especially happening when it is coming back and going to the left now. This is the release or exhaust phase. Release because we are releasing the steam out of the chamber, and exhaust because we are exhausting the stream. And this is typically happening when the piston is moving backwards, so that it actually pushes out the used steam through the exhaust. So we have the draft in the chimney and the smoke box to take all the exhaust gases away. So let's maybe go back again. Admission phase, live steam in, piston is moved to the right, piston valve is going to the right, cutting off the supply. The steam that is inside the cylinder chamber is pushing the piston because it is expanding. Cut off an expansion phase, and then the next one, release and exhaust, because now the port is connected to the exhaust. No more to the live side, but to the exhaust side, so the steam can go out. And this is typically happening before the piston is reaching the end of its run, and it happens quite a lot when it is coming back. So the movement of the piston is typically in this direction here. What happens next? Also, the piston valve head is coming back after reaching its extreme dead center position at the front, and at a certain point it will lock or close the port again on its way back when the piston is coming back again, and now the exhaust steam can no longer go out, because now it is no longer connected with the exhaust side of our piping, it cannot go out of the chimney anymore. And now the piston that is coming back, that is more or less, yeah, pulled back by the turning wheel that is still turning on this end, now it is compressed. This is why it is called the compression phase. So the exhaust steam that is left here gets compressed. Why do we want that? Does that not slow down our procedure here a bit? Maybe it slows down a bit, but on the other hand, this compressed steam here cushions the piston head so that it does not crash against the cylinder lids on this end. So it slows down the movement a bit, but on the other hand, it cushions it. But then, soon or shortly before this piston will the piston head will reach its position on the far left, we will open this port again and have some new live steam in to start the circle anew, or the cycle anew. And yeah, obviously this does not only happen on one side of the piston head, but on the other side as well. But obviously not in the same, in the same order, obviously, but not with the same face. So when we have the admission phase on the left, we will most of the time, not necessarily all the time, it can be that it is a bit shifted, the release phase on the other side. Live steam coming in on this side, pushing the piston to the right, piston is moving there, throwing out the exhaust steam on the other side. Cut-off phase will sometimes at least coincide with the compression phase, so the piston is pushed there, and on the other side the less hot, less pressurized exhaust steam is compressed. Release phase on this end will often coincide with the admission phase on this side, and again compression phase on the left will often coincide with the cutoff or expansion phase on the right. So this is the four phases that we have in our cylinder, and in streams to come we will have to look at how we can control the movement of this piston head here, because obviously this is where the interesting stuff happens. For the locomotive getting the most of the power out in speed, we need to find a perfect balance for those four phases. And this is the task for the valve gear, because the valve gear and the reverse settings then will control the movement of this piston valve spindle, and therefore will control how long have we admission, when we will have a cutoff, when will we release the stream, and how long is our compression phase then. And in former times, the locomotives in the 19th century, most of the time, they did not have those spindles. They had sliding valves, but they worked more or less with the same principle. But sliding valves are harder to maintain, and so the piston valves more or less is what we have on the locomotives in the 20th century, and what we have in our game. I don't think that we have a locomotive that does not have a piston valve. Some things about the phases and what we want to control here, and how we can actually connect it with the rotating movement of the wheel. This is again our composition of steam box and the cylinder with the connection to the exhaust and the live steam. We have seen that this piston valve moves from the left to the right. That is the leftmost position or the backmost position, because this is the side where the wheels are, the back of the locomotive. This would be called the back dead center position, where on the other side it can only go to the front dead center position. And this coincides typically, if you imagine the wheel that is connected to, when the connecting pin is at the farmost to the left or at the farmost to the right. Those are the extreme positions for the piston and the valve gear. The way that the piston valve thingy can travel from its back center to the front center position will be called the valve the valve travel. So typically in a technical documentation of your locomotives, you would find values for how far the valve travel is, typically with the maximum reverser setting, with a 75% cutoff here at our locomotive. This is where you have the furthest valve travel. And another interesting fact is, if you look at this spindle thingy here, you can see that the part that can block the steam parts is typically wider than the steam ports actually are. So that when this thing is moving, it is blocking the port on both sides longer than necessary. So if you would have a spindle or a piston head that is as wide as the port is, then you would have a blocked port only in the instance that this valve is sitting in its middle position. But typically you have a lap on both sides. This is the lap on the exhaust side, because this is the side that is connected to the exhaust, and this is the steam lap, because this is the lap that is connected with the steam side. And those values, the travel and the lap positions, are important if we want to find out about how our valve actually is controlling the steam, and get this into a diagram or something that tells us what is happening in our cylinders. Another thing, there are some locomotives where it is connected just the other way around. There are some locomotives where you get the live steam in on the outside of the piston valve spindle, and the exhaust is on the inside. Obviously you can build it like this, then it works just the other way around. But most locomotives actually have it connected in a way that the steam is coming on the inside and the exhaust is on the outside. But this is not a given, just seem to have turned out the more efficient way. Okay, valve travel, exhaust lap, steam lap, and then there is one other parameter in our valve construction. If the spindle is at its dead center, let's say at the back center position, then we need to know how far the steam port is open then. Here in my example, we would have the steam port open fully. But this is not necessarily so. Sometimes it only opens it to the half or whatever in its dead center position. Also, that is something that you need to know how do you want to construct it. And this is called the lead. In the dead center position, it is open. And that means that the spindle opens the steam port by some degree already when it is not in the back in the dead center position. So when it is still moving towards the back center, the dead center position, it already starts opening the port, and the port is open at least a bit so the stream can trickle in and go in. And how wide this is called the lead. So valve travel, steam lap, exhaust lap, and lead. Those are the four parameters that, for let's say the maximum regulator, the maximum reverser setting, determine the behavior of our piston valve and of our cylinder. And there are quite interesting diagrams that you can find in the literature. For example, the Reuleaux diagram and Zäuner diagrams are quite similar, but a bit more complicated. Maybe I will have a Zäuner diagram in a different stream. Let's try to build a Reuleaux diagram out of what we have here. How do we do this? We take a line that is as long as our valve travel. So let's say we have whatever inches in valve travel, we draw a line that is that long, representing the valve travel. That is the back dead center position of the valve, that is the front dead center position of the valve. And then we draw a circle that has exactly the diameter of our valve travel. And this now is more or less representing the circular movement of our pin on the driving wheel. Just imagine this as the driving wheel where the pin that is connected with the main rod to our piston is going in a circular movement. So every time the circle has been done, it is repeating the same cycle again. We can draw a center line in this circle, and then we start constructing our diagram with that. First, we draw a line that is to the left of the center line, and this is actually the distance that the steam lap gives us. So we're putting here, and we see how much of the valve travel is actually taken up by the steam lap. And then we are putting the next one with the lead spacing in between. Then we need to transport it around 90 degrees to this side. And how do we do this? We draw a line that goes through this point here and the middle of the circle, a perpendicular line to this, and now we have transported this 90 degrees actually to the right, this point here. And from this point on, we put again a line in the distance of the steam lap, and on the other side, distance of the exhaust lap. And now we have 4 points where those lines are cutting the circular line. We have this point here, quite close to the back dead center position. We have this point here, still close to the back dead center position, both on the lower side of our line that we drew first. We have now the points on the top, and here the 4th one. And you can see I color coded them already, because those 4 points are actually connected with the start of the 4 phases that we have already discussed. Let's go through the circle ones. The first one was admission. Let's start at the back dead center and say this is where the admission phase starts. The next one would be the cutoff, where the cutoff starts, where the port is closed and we don't get any fresh steam anymore. Then the release part, and I have already told you that the release typically starts shortly before we reach the front dead center. And then on the way back, the lower part of the circle will be the way back. We have release, release, release until we get to compression, and then compression phase until we get to the start of the admission phase. And the admission phase starts, because of the lead, shortly before we get to the back dead center position again, and everything repeats itself. So if we want to color those thingies, on the top half of the circle we have a movement to the right. The valve and the piston are going that way. So here we would have admission, 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 while our wheel is going from the extreme left position with its pin around the top and getting to a point where we cut off the steam feed because the port is closed now. All this, in this phase, we have live steam going into the cylinder. At this point, the port is fully closed, and we have the cutoff phase now, the expansion phase, where the steam that is still expanding is driving the piston further. We have the cutoff or expansion phase here, and then shortly before we reach the front dead center position, we are going into release. The port opens so that the exhaust can go out on the other end, and then we are doing the travel back on the lower half of the circle. We are starting at this point, front dead center, and the release, now the valve and the piston are going backwards. Release phase is going on until the point where the exhaust port closes. We go into the compression phase until the point where the live steam port opens again, and then we have, before we go to the back dead center position, a very short phase where we get live steam into the space in front of the piston that more or less greets the piston head that is coming to the cylinder wall and cushions it and prepares it for the whole cycle starting again and pushing it to the other direction. And from where those points are situated according to the valve travel lines, you can actually see how this valve is constructed and when we have cut off. Some locomotives for some purposes need very little exhaust lap, some need more lead, like if you want to have locomotives that are running very fast for fast trains, you need more lead or a lead at all compared to freight locomotives that typically don't need that much lead and maybe even have a negative exhaust lap, so that you can always get them out. So those are more or less the parameter and give you an idea when those phases are happening in relation to the turning wheel. And at the same time, if we want to go back and not have it color coded anymore, like this for example, it also shows us why our reverser cannot be set to a cutoff of 100%, for example, but it stops at 75%. Because had we a 100% reverser setting, then the cutoff position would be here, and then there would be no room for other phases. Then we would only have admission until we push the piston to the extreme right or front position, and then we would want to release it again. But it is typically not what we want. We don't want the piston flat and dead at the end, because then we need to rely on the wheels and the rod to pull it back so that we can get our live steam in on the other side and to go into exhaust here. So we would not have a compression and no cutoff phase with 100% cutoff. On the other hand, you have an idea where we get this cutoff phase, and if we are mid-level, we're actually at cutoff 0, then we are not getting any cutoff anymore then we are not getting any live steam in our cylinder anymore. At least this is how I read this diagram. There's obviously much more to it. I have been reading old books on this stuff. It is, in my opinion, quite magical, and it's almost like drawing horoscopes, those things here. And well, you will get, if you want more of this in streams to come, and maybe I understand more and more of those diagrams and of these workings. But it's actually quite nice to see how those phases work and how they are connected in our locomotive. And this repeats obviously quite often on when we're running our locomotives. And this is where we go back to now, running the locomotive home. Again here. Yes, it's good enough. Here we can see the cylinder, and on top of it, the steam box where the piston valve is going from back dead center to front dead center. $70. Himmel, Himmel, blau ohne Stau, says CD Radar. Well, the Himmel, the sky is not blue but white. Everything is white in our DLC here. It's a white out winter wonderland. So I almost got into speeding. And 60 is coming ahead, I have to slow down. And with those speeds I should definitely use some sand to slow down. Especially downhill. Here is the 60. Lass dein Auto stehen, says CD Radar. Yes. Leave your car at home. Use the trains. I think we will have to slow down to 50 quite soon. Here's the Morpeth for the 50. Going a bit uphill, so I don't necessarily need that much sand for this. You don't really see it, but this is the area where we have this abandoned station. It's a corner to the right. And I think at the beginning is the 50 sign already. Or somewhere in this corner at least. Yep, here's the 50. Uphill. Abandoned station here. 65 as soon as we are through. So what I like in the Railtour on West Cornwall Local is that you can really drive those steam locomotives fast. Uphill, downhill, a lot of changes in the speed profile. Let's see if we're getting anywhere close. To the 65. Next one will be, if I am not mistaken, the slowdown to 40 at Hayle. And then we're getting close to Saint Erth. Now we have 2.0 descent. Here's the Morpeth for the 60 first. Ah, there is this in between. So 60. Fine with me. What is this station here? No, I don't know. It's not a station. Here's the 60, and then the next one is the slowdown for Hayle. So I finally got into speeding. That's not cool. Here's the 45 for Hayle. We are already slowed down to that speed. Almost, at least. And yes, in conditions like these, the sender is your friend. .5 miles. To the point where we have to stop. So speed limit will go up again after we have passed this viaduct. But we won't accelerate. We just have the train coast until we get to this signal SE2. What is, if I'm not mistaken, the entry signal for St. Erth. AWS for this yellow signal that is coming out of the fog right now. This is most probably the red signal that we have to stop. So with 20 we are obviously not too fast. We need to be at about 15 when we hit the AWS magnet for this signal. But what is always a bit of a bright ride is that you don't see the signals because your locomotive is in the way. Even if you're leaning out, you're not seeing that much. So if you're not sure where the signal is actually, better take it easy. Good thing is that the AWS magnet is telling you when you are close to the signal, and then you should be at about 15 miles and everything should be okay. Since we're going uphill, I actually need some steam to not stall the train. The last 250 yards. And I think we can already see the signal in the fog ahead. Can't really see the light, but we can see the semaphore blade. Why did we not get an AWS warning? I will get back to what Theodoros wrote on the chat as soon as I managed not to run. So maybe we want to put some sand on the track right now so that we can start on a sanded track, on a sanded rail. What? Scenario failure? Well, that is one thing that I wanted to say. Never get closer than 10 yards to a red signal with your steam locomotive, because you are not supposed to go to the 2 yards point. The relevant point in your locomotive is always measured, and they somehow did not calculate the boiler into it, so yeah, I really wanted to stop nicely in front of the red signal, but I got an inch too close. That is the problem. If you want to stop on the best position, you always should have 10 yards left on your counter, because otherwise you can run into a scenario failure like this. Then you spat out because the boiler, the 10 yards in front of you, are still kicking it. The front cap steam engine is considered awkward anyway. The operation kind of unpractical. Yeah, it is more or less like this. You are right. This is why they turned the locomotives around as soon as it was possible, like on the 20, and have pairs of them so that you can actually see where you are driving. Well, we would have made it anyway, and this scenario failure shows you that you have to be cautious. Better stop 15 yards away of the red signal. I wanted to make it too nicely so that we have the signal in our window, and got a bit too close. So that you can rewatch it. There were 10 yards left of our point, but if you want to try to go to the 2 yards point, then you run into a spat, because the system does not calculate your boiler and the length of it into it. So you need to have some safety margin to not run into scenario failures like I just did. Well, the scenario would have just gone on with driving the train to Penzance. An interesting thing is to start the train at this signal again, because you are in an incline, you have to do the Hillstart. But we had a Hillstart before when we had to stop the train because of the problem with the super fast turning wheel and valve gear. This cuts the stream a bit short, unfortunately. I'm sorry that I cannot show you the way from St. Erth to Penzance and the sea, what is always nice. Yeah, it cuts it short. Well, CD radar, it is less than 90 minutes. The stream for today. Well, I think I had what I wanted to show you in my presentation, and we had a Hillstart anyway, so maybe I should be happy with that. But I'm not. Obviously, it's annoying. So, big marker, careful with getting too close to the 0 yard mark, because if you're getting closer than 10 yards, you spat out, as you have seen here. Thank you very much for bearing with me in the winter wonderland, in the whiteout. We'll see what we have next week. I hope I will be able to get something together for next week. And over the year there will be more Steam streams, because it is such a mesmerizing topic. Thank you guys, thank you AJ for moderating, thank you CD Radar, thank you Theodorus, and have a nice time. See you around.